Hello, everyone. Wherever, whenever, and however you're listening, thanks for tuning in. My name is Kevin Kitchin, running for Maine Senate District 16, which is Waterville, Winslow, Oakland, Fairfield, and Albion. And this is Transparency, unscripted and unbiased, coming to you from a shared studio in beautiful downtown Waterville, Maine. Tonight, we are going to talk to a couple special guests that I've met through this process beginning my campaign. I guess the question would be, how many of you, or do you know of people that have had issues with drug abuse or alcoholism throughout their years? As I started out this journey in running for Senate, one of the things that was important to me and near and dear to my heart was the problems that we have here in Maine with drugs and alcohol. One day, I was walking through the studio here. I was taking some pictures. I was working on my webpage, and I came across these two gentlemen that you see on the screen here. And we were just talking and found out that they had quite the interesting background that kind of touched me a little bit. So I invited them on to talk about some of the challenges that they've had in their lives. So with me tonight is Jeremy, who has been sober since November of 2014, and Sean, who has been clean for over 6 years now.
Yes.
Welcome, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
I appreciate you guys coming in. This is going to be probably a 3-part podcast for us because there's so much to cover in this area. And one of the things I want to do when I get to Augusta is be able to network and know people and understand the problems that we face. And I think, having had a stepdad who was an alcoholic and seeing that when I was a kid, it was pretty rough. Whether it be the verbal abuse or the physical abuse, and it kind of always pushed me away from alcohol. Did I drink? Yeah, I probably drank more than I should have over the years. That's just one of those things. Am I a heavy drinker now? No, because I've learned to, through my experiences as a drug and alcohol program advisor in the Navy, the damages that it can do. And that's just alcohol. In the military, we have a stigma that, a drunken sailor, which kind of why I wanted to talk to you guys. As I met the both of you, I would have had no idea of your stories. And that's kind of what I want to talk to you about tonight. There's a stigma out there about alcoholism and drug abuse. Somebody thinks that, you're a drug addict, that you're a homeless person eating out of a trash can, whatever the worst case stigma. But I think this affects a lot of the population, and it becomes a subject that most people don't want to talk about.
Absolutely, you're right. I mean, I think we hit pretty well on it when we were talking before the show here. I mean, we have these preconceived notions of what a drug addict is or what an alcoholic is. And I mean, I was sitting here talking to Jeremy, and we were trying to come to a conclusion, and I said, well, what is everyone's preconceived notion of a drug addict or a drunk? And I think the first word that came to one of our heads was homelessness. Right. Yep. So it does go to show how we have those preconceived notions that lead to this stigma that you're talking about.
I think obviously it's unfair. I've met quite a few people that have had struggles throughout their lives. Do you think I would say it doesn't discriminate?
Absolutely not. I mean, this is how we can really look at it. I mean, most people have the notion, like in my case, I was addicted to narcotics. So, most people are like, well, he put a needle in his arm. He deserves, what he gets. Yeah. Well, what a lot of people don't know is, well, how did he become addicted? A lot of people just think, they chose to. Yeah. Well, if you take my case, for instance, I got into a horrible accident when I was 13 years old that left me with severe nerve damage in my arm. So I lived for battling with narcotic addiction for
So-
15 years before I got
So you were
into
13
treatment.
years old.
Absolutely.
So I'm glad you bring that up because I think it's important for parents to know that it can impact anybody. I was reading some data that it doesn't seem like a big number, but 11% of children, high school, or I should say, school-age children, 11% have tried some type of opioid or painkiller or whatever the case may be.
Well, see, this is another thing, too. A lot of the times, these narcotics are given to children, and they might not be in the sense of, like, what you think a narcotic is.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is codeine is a narcotic.
Yeah.
And that is another drug that they tend to give children when they are in accidents. So before, like, when you get into, like, with my situation, I was addicted before I knew it. I
Yeah.
mean, so from 13 to, I would probably say, 16 years of age, when my medication was weaning down and I started feeling
tell?
sick, I literally thought I was becoming sick. I had no idea
didn't
what
know.
I didn't know
You
what
didn't know.
withdrawals were. No, absolutely not.
And I would say too that it doesn't necessarily, from my experience, have to be a narcotic based pill.
No, no. I mean,
I'll just use and I'm not smart on all the medications. I've been prescribed so many different pain medicines due to my disabilities from the military. In fact, when I went to the VA, my doctor, she told me, I'm surprised you're not addicted to pain pills as much as you've been prescribed. I don't take them because I'm fearful of that.
Right.
it's probably a good fear to have. I
Yeah,
mean, I
definitely.
hate to say that. I mean, because we hate being in pain when we get hurt.
I took it as, the pain, kind of starting where you started, the pain. I would rather feel some of the pain and not mask it. But I was on a pill, it's called Tramadol, I think, which was
That's a synthetic opiate, actually.
is it?
Yes, it is.
And I could tell when I was on it, it was like, it kind of scared me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so from 13 to 16, you had no idea. So then what?
So what happened with me is from about 13 to 16 years of age, they originally started me out on codeine, like I told you, and it moved from there to hydrocodone, which is Vicodin. So by, I'd say, 15 years of age, the Vicodin really wasn't working, so they moved me to oxycodone, Percocet.
Couldn't work because
Which
you
is-
still had the feeling of pain. Or
Well, see, at the time, the way that the narcotic, or I should say, man, this is back when narcotics were really starting to become prevalent. So what was happening is these pharmaceutical companies were coming into doctors' offices and pretty much pushing these drugs. So this idea became, when the narcotic starts to lessen, not work as well, give more.
Right, because you get used to it.
Yeah, and their idea is keep increase. They got to a point where it was almost like they had people on crazy numbers for milligrams of narcotics.
So let me ask you this question then. We are, as parents, or I would say that most of us are taught to pick up on the signs.
Well, see, this is where the waters get murky. Okay.
Exactly, and that's kind of where I was going with this. So, let's go back in those days.
Okay,
right there,
so-
we're talking about 16 or so. What would you say could be picked up on that the average person wouldn't know that you are beginning to go down this road? So, for our viewers, let's say we have a mom and dad at home.
Oh, it's a very this is an easy sign to tell. You will literally see somebody start reclusing. Once they start disconnecting, you need to start becoming aware. Like those mood changes, those incremental mood changes. You know, a couple days, we have bad days. Don't get me wrong. Everybody has bad days.
Yeah.
I'm talking about when you get into 2, 3, 4 weeks of a funk and they don't come out. I think you need to start concerning yourself. What is going on? And to be honest, I really wouldn't probably let it get past more than 2 weeks, week and a half. And 2 weeks, I'd start worrying about my kid if they didn't come out of their funk. But
Now, Jeremy, with alcohol, did you find that it was similar to what Sean's talking about?
Well, so when I did alcohol, I started drinking when I was 21, and it got to the point where I was drinking so much, people wouldn't realize this, but I would just start drinking in the morning. I'd be a closet drinker. So sometimes I'd go to work reeking of alcohol. But you could definitely tell that I was strung out sometimes from, being hungover.
But it didn't just start.
Well, so it didn't just start, but I
Were you binge drinking, or
Yeah.
did you become dependent upon it?
it's kind of binge drinking, kind of like, so it'd be like a Friday night, and then you'd go out there and buy a 24 rack. You'd drink it.
next thing you know, it's Monday morning and you're dragging your butt into high school.
Yeah, you just like drink all night long, and then like you don't really want to move or do much like Saturday and Sunday, so you just keep drinking.
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, it's Monday morning, and you're like, well, I don't feel good, so I'm going to
Have a drink.
have a couple more drinks.
Yeah.
So that's basically what it was. And then it got to the point where it just, everyone was talking to me that knew me, and they were worried about it.
So
Alcohol's a big factor. I mean, I had a little bit of alcoholism too, because I did heavily drink from probably right around 16 to when I turned 21, 22.
The difficult part with alcohol is it doesn't have the stigma.
No.
It's normalized in society to always
and-
have like a beer in your hand.
And it's great that you bring this up, because this played a big role into me going into treatment, because, I come from a military background. My father was in the Navy. So, addiction to me was alcoholism. So when I became addicted to narcotics, like I knew what addiction was, but my perceptions of what it was completely different, because I always looked at addiction from an alcohol standpoint.
And I was
So,
the opposite.
yeah.
Because my dad's an alcoholic. And so I was raised that it was normal to just
you didn't
drink.
know any different.
Yeah.
Right. So I didn't know that was alcoholism, but it's in my family and it's hereditary. So I was predeceived to it because it's hereditary, but people would warn me, don't start drinking, you might get addicted.
I can relate to that, because as a kid, my stepdad was a heavy drinker. When we went to family functions, they drank.
Yep.
That was, I don't know.
That was
if that's-
normal.
I thought it was normal back
Right.
then.
Yeah.
I thought that was normal, and get in the car and ride home and lay in the back window, and that's life.
Yep.
But then when I started seeing the physical abuse,
Yeah.
the verbal abuse, and the signs, it kind of scared me a little bit. And that's why I just wanted to touch a little bit on both of them, because I think they could tie into each other. From
Absolutely.
what I understand is how. Now we're talking about how did it start? How did it start for both of you? But how can our parents or our grandparents, or
Well, see, we were just getting, we were talking about how it was getting murky. And see, this is where these preconceived notions of what we think a drug addict is or an alcoholic is. I mean, look at it from a parent standpoint that has a child who's 14, 15 years old now, has nerve damage, has severe pain, physically is having a hard time going to school because of this pain, and they know their child's in pain, but I'm sure they could see the signs of it. So they know that giving them this pill makes it so that he can function. Mm-hmm. But the problem is what was happening with the doctors. I mean, because we all listen to our doctors, right? So the doctors were the ones saying it's okay,
Right.
So your parents get these notions. I'm glad we're where we're at now and know what we know now. Right. But I mean, from that standpoint, that's why, I mean, addiction doesn't always start the way that we think it does. And that's why...
What do you mean by that?
What I mean by addiction doesn't start the way that we think it does. Like I was saying earlier, Most people have this notion, oh, if he's using and he sticks a needle in his arm to get high,
Or he's drinking.
or drinking, or what, he deserves what happens to him. You know, that he got himself into that situation.
Yeah.
Knowing what those factors of what pushed somebody into that situation can vary tremendously. And that's what I mean by that when we make those preconceived notions, it stops people from wanting to get help, because they think that they're going to be ostracized for saying, hey, I have a problem, I need help.
Do you, I guess it's an obvious answer, but, or obvious question. Do you guys think that parents are also feel that? Like, oh,
Well, see,
I don't want to be.
This is another thing that happens with parents too, and I can only speak more from the narcotic side of this, because that's really what I suffered with.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, even everyone around somebody who's addicted to narcotics, they suffer. And what I mean by that is parents want to see what's best for their kids.
Mm-hmm.
So they may look at the situation, and this is what, once they find out that their kid's addicted to drugs, this is where codependency and stuff comes in. What can end up happening is the parent may think that, and this works with alcohol too. I don't want my kid going out on the town drinking. I rather have them home drinking.
Right, where he's safe.
Where he's safe.
Did you, when it comes to the drinking aspect, did you do that, or were you kind of a reckless drinker, or did you stay home and try to hide it?
So it was both. So when I would go out with my friends, I would go out.
It was party on the town.
Yeah, it was party on the town, but I drove. I had at least one OUI. So then I lost my license for 3 months, and then
You wrecked your car, right? At
no,
one point?
no. Luckily, no, I did not wreck. I never had any accidents. Luckily, knock on wood. I'm glad I didn't.
I think you might be
anybody.
thinking about me. I had a little bit of a stint into some
I remember I was talking to one of you
pills.
guys.
I backed into a power pole with my car.
So luckily, nothing like that happened. But when I wasn't out at the bars and stuff, like it's Waterville, so they're all walking distance. When I was at home, I would do it with my friends, and then I would also do it when they went home. Mm-hmm. So even though that nobody was still there, I'm like, I want to keep drinking. So then I would just drive down to the local Big Apple. I lived in Fairfield Center at the time, and I would just buy some Natty Daddies.
Yeah.
And 99-cent cans of beer. It was cheap. It was effective. 8%.
I was gonna say, I remember
It was disgusting, but
right around 20, that was like when Steel Reserve came around, and
yeah. Well, I was
if you were
I was
drunk,
older than that, but I didn't drink until I was 21. But when I did start drinking, I go big or go home. That's my mentality, and I have an addictive personality. So I put my all into something.
that's a
and,
big thing too.
yeah. So that was it's a downfall for obviously drinking purposes, but.
So, and the reason why I'm trying to tie both of you guys into this is I guess is the point that I'm trying to make is, as a abuser, is that the right word?
Yeah, I abused alcohol, absolutely.
I mean, I know I'll be an addict for the rest of my life.
Me
so,
too, or alcoholic.
So,
I mean,
as an
I'll
alcoholic,
struggle with it for the rest of my
as
life.
an alcoholic or an addict, at some point during this process, and that's where I'm trying to tie them both in, the alcohol and the drugs, you knew that I need help,
Yeah,
or I'm pushing it.
yeah. It was my last time that I had alcohol. Was the night I needed help.
How many?
I remember the night that I finally decided. I do. I remember that night very well.
Let's hold that thought. Let's back up a little bit. How many times?
To get to those points?
Yes. Did it take to get to that point where, you know what, I'm too much. I'll do it, because tobacco, for example.
For me, it took 3 real tries of trying. Now, if you're talking about buying, because what happened
Define trying.
okay, so what happens with a lot of narcotic users is when we decide to quit, or we think we're ready to quit, we do what's called the street pharmacist quitting, in the sense of I was going out and buying Suboxone. Well, as we know, Suboxone is something that's used to wean people off of narcotics. Well, when you're buying it on the street and you don't have that connection to counseling, you're not going to get far. So I was buying this stuff on the street and telling people, I'm getting clean. No, I wasn't.
What
You were
about
just using different stuff.
At that point, yeah, there was no seriousness about getting clean. I was making it look like I was. It was to make myself feel better.
what about for alcohol?
So for me, I never once had tried to quit drinking. It was to the point where I never thought I had a problem.
Really?
I had
It
people
took
that
me a little while too.
I had people that would talk to me and they'd say, "I think you have a problem." I'm like, I could stop at any time. I don't have a problem. I just didn't want to stop. I didn't want to. I was in denial.
Now, what first started to get me to try to get help was my first overdose. And if you know me, I'm pretty hard-headed. And this is one thing that I regret putting on my wife, Candace, is I didn't let her call 911 to get me help that night. She literally had to give me sternum rubs and slap me in the face and literally give me mouth-to-mouth all night to keep me alive because I would stop breathing because I was overdosing, and every time I would come to, I wouldn't let her call I wouldn't let her call an ambulance. Right. So, but that was after that night, I knew something had to change. Now it took a couple years after that point, and then the next point of when I went to try to get clean, it was through a Suboxone program here in Waterville. Well, what happened with me in Suboxone is I probably did, I don't know, almost 3 months in the program, a little over 2 months. And the Suboxone that I was taking, when it built up in my system, I was getting migraines from it. So it wasn't benefiting me the way it should be.
So
I went back into using. So that was my first real stint into getting help. And then I dropped out of that, and then I thought for the longest time the only way that I was going to get help would be to essentially go into a locked facility. I thought that was the only thing left.
do you
And then I learned what an MMT program is. It's methadone maintenance treatment.
do you at this point for both of you, did you think that consequences, and for you, Jeremy, first, do you think that consequences mattered, whether it be legally or personally? Were you ever worried about consequences as you were beginning to, or before you realized you had a problem?
I didn't worry
No.
about it. I wasn't really worried about consequences.
I don't
I wasn't thinking about it. Now there were times where I would drive to the concourse. I had a Mustang at the time. It was a convertible. I would drive to the concourse. I would just drink all night long, and I would fall asleep. And I was smart about it. I would fall asleep in my car.
You're smart about it, huh?
Well, I say that because so what they do is they knock on your door, of course, if you're in the parking lot and you're sleeping. Well, I was smart. I had put my key like on the tire, so it wasn't on my person, so they couldn't try to get me for drinking and driving.
Right.
So after they realized that, they went on their merry way and woke me up. But so I was smart about it. I wasn't worried about the consequences.
You weren't worried about it, but you were aware of them?
Yeah, I was absolutely
yeah,
aware that I could get in trouble. I just wasn't. I wasn't worried that I would get consequences because, I just didn't see that part of it. I didn't see the need to worry.
That's where the split personality comes from with being a narcotic user. I do believe that, well, if you really want to get technical, all narcotic users, in my opinion, have two personalities. They have their normal personality, and then they have their withdrawing personality. And when they go into their withdrawal personality, I guarantee you they become 150% different of a person. They change.
So for the consequences, and I've seen that in somebody I know very well.
Consequences go out the window at that point. You're so fixated on the end game of what you're trying to accomplish that nothing matters.
So, and the reason why
and you will hurt anyone.
the reason why I ask you guys this question is because there are, and I want to try to keep politics out of this because I don't think this is a political.
No, this is something that falls widely on the spectrum.
Yes. However, and the reason why I bring up consequences is because there are different thought processes of lawmakers in the state of Maine that seem to think, whether it be the Good Samaritan laws or whatever may be out there, that if you threaten them with, well, if you do this or we come to your house for an overdose, you're going to get X, you know. I guess my point is that a user or an abuser, however we want to put it, doesn't care about the consequences when they're in their, I guess, prime of addiction or abuse. So it does, I think it could probably only hurt the situation of somebody trying to get help.
Well,
Yeah, it'll definitely hurt.
Well, see, what happens is if you're on that notion of lock them up, like what happens with a lot of times, like say somebody got caught with a usable amount, like they're not a dealer, they're just using to get by with their habit, their habit
or
is.
it could be a underage drinker, the same thing.
Right.
whatever the drug might be. So what happens is they get pulled over or the cop comes into the house and they arrest this individual. Yes, they go to jail, they're not using. That's great. I'm not saying it's not. Here's the problem. It's when they get out. What happens when they get out?
They're going to go back to using
Exactly.
or drinking.
There's nothing in the process for them to get help after that point.
And the hard part is,
And mandating help too also
right,
is-
you can't mandate help. You can't successfully quit without wanting to.
Yeah,
and that's
we as humans, it's something that we have to want to do ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we'll talk about that here in a minute. So, in the process, as we're stepping through the process,
and
you were, what's that?
well, I wanted to tie back a little bit because I wanted to make a point on the difference between a user and a dealer, because that's where the waters get muddied in this argument. Is a lot of people.
What argument are you talking about?
I'm talking
consequences
the consequences
and the laws?
with the law enforcement.
Okay.
The argument becomes lock them up. It's what it's good for. I'm not saying like if they found somewhere. I mean, I don't know, a few grams of heroin or something.
Let's reset the stage to make sure that our viewers are on following. We'll use drugs in this case.
Okay.
Let's use drugs. We're at a party. There's alcohol and there's drugs. Did I hit the microphone? There you go.
You cut it out.
You're just getting a little low in the volume.
The kids or whoever it is at a party.
Yep.
Drugs and alcohol are involved. Somebody calls the police for noise complaint, whatever the case may be. They walk into the house, and there's drugs or alcohol. Is that where you were going? Now,
Yes.
Now
So-
there is a difference. So let's be in that scenario, so to speak.
In that scenario, that would be a criminal scenario at that point. I mean, they're there for a noise complaint. So if they find something, that's that. But what I'm trying to say is now if they pull one of those people out of the party and they have 5 grams of heroin in their pocket, I don't think they're a user.
Yeah,
I think they're the one supplying the party.
yeah,
We can tell who the dealer is.
yeah.
Now, this is where the argument comes between the users and separating the dealers. And that's the gray area that creates the argument.
What do you mean by the gray area?
The gray area
I think he means about like the consequences.
with the politics of it. I mean, because that's why you have some people, they say, every one of them should be locked up for X amount of days.
Anybody that's at
the same crime, the same time. You see what I'm saying? So instead of trying,
I think he's trying to discern the difference between a drug, like a user versus a dealer.
Yeah.
right, okay.
in regards to like the consequences
consequence aspect
that
of
they
it.
would they would have
Because
legally.
Okay, so I guess to better suit the scenario that I'm trying to explain here is what happens a lot of the times is, say there's, I don't know, 3 or 4 people in a house using. They're just users, okay? They're just addicts. They're not drug dealers. They're not going over state lines. They're not moving huge quantities.
Is that how you did it? Were you at the house and just...
Yeah, a regular user. So what happens is somebody will overdose. Now, do I call the paramedics to bring them to the house knowing that I have drugs there?
Yeah.
Or do I let this person die? So what happens is at that point, most users aren't thinking straight anyways.
It's just like
They're
alcohol.
panicking.
You make bad decisions on
yeah,
alcohol.
it's a
Right.
bad decision from the start. So they're going to choose not to get that person help because they're going to be afraid of the consequences.
Right.
And that's...
And that's where this argument that I'm trying to say comes into place. Because now, if it's a user, let's get them help. Let's not lock them away because most people just want to. They want. If you get caught with drugs, you get X amount of days. That's what most people want to do.
I understand what you're saying, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Liz Perkins story. Very similar. In fact, I'll be doing.
Is that the Good Samaritan? How the story that happened based on that law?
Yes. We'll be having a podcast in the future with Ann, her mom, to discuss that situation of. And I don't want to speak out of turn, but it was very similar. I don't want to go down that road yet, but where it led to her death.
Yeah, and that's what's happening.
There was, for whatever reason, fear of getting help or whatever the case may be, overdosing, whatever the case may be.
It's usually the fear of getting in trouble if they
think,
get help.
I think that's something that we need to address.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. And I think there's like a difference between alcoholism, obviously, and drug abuse, because as an alcoholic, I don't usually worry about that because alcohol is legal, obviously. But the issue is where obviously drug use isn't legal. So
right.
I could foresee obviously happening. Where
I can remember a situation when we were drinking back in high school. A kid got alcohol poisoning, and instead of calling the paramedics, they drug him down the street and then called an ambulance.
right.
Nobody was around this kid when he was flopping around at the bottom of the street.
Yeah.
Who knows if a car would have come down and run him over? These are the stupid decisions that you make when you're
Well, you're drinking, but
when
you're also
drinking.
a minor.
Yeah. So I understand that, yes, there needs to be consequences. That's why the other day we were talking about how this consequence structure needs to be set up.
So,
Is what the argument has to become eventually.
So, and we started off this talking about the consequences, and it's evident that consequences don't matter at that point, unless.
Yes and no.
I shouldn't say they don't matter.
It's a yes and no.
We just talked about that because no matter how effed up you are,
I still have feelings. I still know
Yeah.
it's wrong.
Yeah.
I still feel bad.
yeah,
Like one big thing that I have to come to terms with is the people I hurt. And what I mean by that is the people I stole from to support my habit.
right.
And a lot of those people are people that were really close to me. Now, I can't replace a lot of those things that I stole. A lot of those are sentimental things. Those will never be returned. So trying to come to terms with that and making amends with someone is a very hard thing to do.
So the consequences, as we were talking about the early stages of addiction, and then we go from early stages to consequences or whatever from the base standpoint, not necessarily.
That's why I don't want to say they don't care,
Yeah.
because they do. Some do. Some don't.
I didn't.
I
care,
know
but
I
then
did. I did, but I didn't.
You didn't?
I didn't really care about not when I was doing it.
Yeah.
Not until I didn't care the consequences until they happened.
Like I knew
Like
I was
when
going
I was arrested for
like,
OUI. Then I cared.
How did that go? I mean, did you have a job? Did you have a family at that time? How did that?
So when I got my OUI, I think I was 22-ish at the time. So that was, so I was drinking and driving. They towed my car back. I mean, I had a family. It was me and my mom. Not much of a family. I hadn't had any kids back then. I still didn't think I had a problem. I had to take the deep class. Luckily, then it was 3 months suspension. So I almost got a second OUI. That would have been 3 year suspension because of the second OUI. They try to obviously make it worse for the second time because you didn't learn the first time around.
Right.
But the first time, car got towed back. Luckily, it was a simple stop. I failed a sobriety test. They cuffed me, stuffed me, brought me back to the Waterville PD, and they gave me a ride home after. So luckily, that time I didn't have any. I mean, I lost my license.
You probably had to do like a $40 or $60 bail, I would have imagined.
So no, so because I knew the bail commissioner, they let me go.
They cited you, cite and release.
But
lucky.
Well, so they let me sober up, and then I came back the next day and paid the bail because I used to work on some of their computers. But so that part was a little embarrassing. But
was it then? What made you decide through this process that you had enough? What was the
it wasn't even then. So
you?
the final straw was when I had almost my second OUI. I had it didn't end up going forward, but I got arrested. The cops came, towed my company car away.
You were working?
I was not working. I was.
okay.
It was my only car at the time was a company car, but I was still drinking and driving. And then they pulled me over. I was actually so funny story. It was a when I got in trouble for it, I was in the drive-through of a McDonald's, and then they got me then, but then they arrested me, brought me back to the PD, then let me go, and then the whole court thing happened. But so it could have gone a lot worse than it did. Mm-hmm. I'm very lucky, but so that night, I'm not religious, but that night I was.
Your come to Jesus moment?
Yeah, essentially, I said, if you don't get me, if I don't get in trouble for this would be the last time I ever touch alcohol. If you get me out of this, and it happened.
Now, if you were a drug addict, that would have went out the window, and it would have been a few more times. I can guarantee that.
I don't know. That was my come to Jesus moment.
That was
I mean, everyone needs a moment.
That's for sure. I mean,
that was mine.
I do remember mine too. Mine was the night that my daughter was born, actually, because my wife, we almost lost her in childbirth, and I can remember having to leave.
Almost lost your wife?
Yeah, from childbirth. She hemorrhaged. So I can remember having to leave right during the height of stuff to meet my dealer. On the way back to the hospital, I got pulled over. And I thought for sure I was going to jail because they even brought the canine out, the sniff and everything. Luckily, the dog didn't hit. I had weed in the car earlier that week, so I'm surprised that they didn't search the car. But I had narcotic pills at the time, and the amount that I had on me probably would have put me away for a little while. So that was the night that I knew that I was done. I used that night, and the next morning is when I called treatment center. That was my come to Jesus moment.
What would you tell families out there?
Don't give up.
Yeah, don't give up on them.
Don't give up.
Because they need a reason to keep going.
Absolutely. And what happens with a lot of people that go into recovery, they don't have good support structures a lot of the time. And if you don't have a good support structure, you're not going to do well in recovery.
So, speaking about doing well, we had talked a little bit before about how long you guys have been sober or clean. Jeremy, what keeps you going? Because I shouldn't say I know. I understand because I haven't been in your shoes. From my understanding, it's a day-by-day, minute-by-minute battle.
Yep.
And probably for you
Absolutely.
as well, too, Sean. What keeps you going every day to...
So for me, it's my daughter. And it's everything that... So it's my daughter, but it's also what I'm trying to build.
Yeah, I was gonna
Whether
say,
or not
mine's
it's
a little bit of a variety too.
so whether or not it's a successful business, which it is. Also not wanting to disappoint people. I have a lot of people in my life. I have a really good support system, so I would not at all want to disappoint them now. I didn't really have that back then, but I still got clean, obviously. But
Right.
because luckily,
It's awesome you say that, because my support structure was kind of crappy in the beginning, and then it built. And
Yeah.
what I have now, I do.
I mean, I had
cherish
a good.
I cherish it, and
I had some good friends then. So I mean, don't get me wrong there, but I didn't have like I don't have like a lot of family that I talk to on a daily basis. So I don't really have. And my mom had passed away by then. So and my dad's an alcoholic, so that's not going to work. He still is actively drinking.
that was one
so-
of my first mistakes in the beginning, was getting a sponsor that was a friend.
What
Don't get a sponsor that's a friend.
what keeps you going?
Like Jeremy, my kid, trying to do well for myself. Well, number one thing is do well for myself, of course, but my kid's number two. Trying to make amends with everyone that I've hurt. One thing I do now is I try to place myself in situations instead of falling into situations because of circumstances. And what I mean by that is I definitely choose who I hang out with now. Like I see Jeremy once a week.
Yeah, you surround yourself with people.
Yeah.
that-
Positive people.
Positive people. That's a big thing in recovery. Is and then here's another thing too is the last when I went into recovery and it finally took. It also took me getting rid of my entire cell phone. I literally smashed it to pieces to lose every number I had because I kept going back. So
I'll tell you, I'm sure Sean will agree with this. You really find out who your friends are when
yeah,
you get
that's
clean.
that's
Really?
the truth.
That's for sure. Like after I stopped drinking, like hardly anybody showed up anymore
yeah, I made
because
that.
I was no longer the life of the party.
I made that mistake, and that was one of my lapses. Because we had this discussion the other day. We were talking about lapse and relapse and what the difference between the two are. And I talked to you about a couple because I had a few lapses before it finally
So
stopped.
for the audience that's not aware, what is the difference between lapse and relapse?
Okay, what the difference between a lapse and a relapse is a relapse is when you essentially fall back into active addiction. It means that recovery,
It could be alcohol.
yeah,
too,
or
I
even
would assume.
alcohol. Whatever you were working towards is out the window. It's no longer viable. You're
Right.
no longer following that step. So I just lost my thought.
Lapse and relapse.
Lapse. Okay, sorry. So yes, a lapse.
A lapse in memory.
Yes, that happens all the time. But yes, a lapse is essentially when somebody uses, and then instead of falling into a full-blown relapse, they make amends with themselves, right? Like, so this is where the argument comes in of how long is and what is the length between a lapse and a relapse?
I think it would depend on the individual.
And that's what I tend to tell people is it depends on the individual. So
Especially if you enact your plan.
yeah, so what I like to tell people is the second you know that you've messed up and you don't work your channels to going back into active recovery, you've relapsed. That, in my opinion. But that's the argument that it becomes is when is when. So, but that's a general idea of the difference between a lapse and a relapse. But yeah, we talked a couple times about some of my lapses, and it definitely one of my lapses was being around somebody that was a friend that I thought was a good friend, and I ended up using.
Yeah.
And that's why he made a good point. It really, your friends really
It's
matter in recovery.
Because if they're your real friends, they would be more supportive and they
Yeah.
wouldn't put you in that position
to use or drink.
and
or even offer.
Yeah.
what I found with you guys is I came across your stories at two different times. for Sean, the first time that we had met, um, we had met over coffee and we were just talking. And then I was talking about my concern for drugs in the state. And we just started talking like this. We just started having a general conversation. And the first thing that I picked up, see, in the military, one of the things that we do is we judge, we evaluate and judge people all the time.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
the majority part of our job, is just to evaluate character judgment. And the first thing I picked up on was the fact of how proud you were that you have been clean for so long.
Well,
And it became the growing conversation where it just sucked me into wanting to understand. Here is somebody where I would never have guessed. It goes back to what we first started talking about with the stigma, preconceived notions of what an alcoholic is or a drug person is. I never would have known. But then it was like, okay, from the political side, I want to know how we can help address the problem. But I became more and more involved in wanting to truly understand what you went through to get there. And we've had a very open dialogue about it. And the same with Jeremy on the different side. I think I was here taking some pictures at a shared studio, taking some pictures or doing something, and you were here. And I forget even how the conversation started about, drugs. And it was something that I wanted to talk about as my platform, and you just piped up and said, I've been sober since November of 2014. So it's like the people that
it affects.
Yes,
Yeah.
they're proud of it, and I would say that the families out there that are struggling with somebody in treatment right now, I think from knowing you guys. Just talking about how long it is.
That's what it is. It's a connection issue with people when it comes to rehabilitation and drugs or alcohol. A lot of the times we as people have a hard time connecting with people.
Right.
So we shut ourselves off. But I do think if more people come out and share their stories. See, because the way I look at it now is even if my story reaches 10 people and it only helps one, even if it doesn't, I mean, it still helps me. But even if it just helps one person, I'm happy at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
don't want to see people go through the pain I had to go through for so many years.
I don't want to make this all mushy or whatever, but after the conversations with both of you separately, 2 different days, weeks cross paths, I felt good getting into my truck and driving home, saying, "Wow, that was pretty cool. I could relate to them," or whatever the case may be. But it got me thinking on, and you just touched on it, Sean. Let's go back to the intervention part. Not so much for, I wouldn't say so much intervention of people that are already using, but let's say for a parent, a brother, a sister, an aunt, uncle, grandma, grandpa, whoever it may be, knowing, like what you had just said, how to connect or find the areas to bridge that disconnection of somebody that needs
to reach
help.
common ground.
Yeah.
It is. It's a hard thing to accomplish with, especially, I can really speak for being an addict wise, but I did drink a little bit, so I guess this would apply for drinking too, but bridging that gap with people is a really, really hard thing to do, but once it's done, it benefits everybody in the family, because the person who's using or drinking, they're not necessarily going to be in the right frame of mind from the start.
Exactly.
So trying to figure out a way.
Or will they, I don't mean to cut you off, will they realize, I would expect, I haven't been in this situation, but I'm asking you, and I'm sure some of the viewers may have the same question. And I would expect that the loved ones will sense the need of intervention before the user? Or
Well, see, this is what ends up happening is codependency is a really powerful thing. A lot of people end up thinking they're helping, but in the long run, they're actually hurting. And this is where counseling comes in for the whole entire family when somebody's in recovery. Like, it would benefit you to go to a family session with somebody who's in recovery.
How do we get there? How do we get to that family session? Let's say me and Jeremy, we notice that there's something going on with you. How can we get you to go to counseling with us to that? What's the best way?
One big thing that worked for me was finding a pamphlet that had some really good information on it. That was just here in the local area. I picked it up and called the number, and that's when I first went into Suboxone treatment. And yeah, so it took me. I don't know where that pamphlet came from.
So you did that, but what would you guys recommend for the loved ones to get involved in that process, to help intervene?
This is what I like to tell people to do is, as parents, you love that individual, you want them to get help, and a lot of the times you end up butting heads, and it always becomes a fight because
which is a bad thing because it just causes people to shut down.
And it pushes each other away, and that's why I tend to tell people to get pamphlets and stuff from the doctor's office about addiction, about alcohol, AA meetings in the local area, even if they're at a church. Pick that pamphlet up because we all do have a loved one somewhere. I'm sure just about everybody has a loved one in their family that's addicted to alcohol or drugs. And instead of fighting with them, leave that pamphlet on their passenger seat of their car. And
or even in the house on the counter.
Yeah, even,
like I'm
even
the
on
one
the counter.
doing the research type of thing?
Yeah.
Is that what you're suggesting?
So what happens is they come by and, what's this thing on my passenger seat? And picks it up and, he opens it up and is reading through it and, oh, I didn't know that this was here in Waterville. Really? This a lot of this is what I'm going through. And, so you start to get these ideas of what treatment may look like. So then, like, usually the next step is they pull their phone out, they start doing research in the area. So at that point, they've picked it up, and it's their choice.
Right.
It's not you telling them to go.
So for you, Jeremy, in your instance, which is obviously different than Sean's, how would you recommend intervention for somebody in your shoes? How do you think you could have been helped sooner?
I probably would have. So honestly, I don't know if I could have been. I think I would have had to have known that I had the issue sooner. I think one thing is just making sure that the parent or the family member just tells the person, I love you.
Yeah.
So that way, no matter what happens, the person that's the alcoholic knows that, that person still loves them and that they can admit that they have some issues. Because I have a dad that's an alcoholic, and he knows he's an alcoholic, but he just hasn't. So I'm on the other side of it. Even though I'm an alcoholic, I'm on the other side of it with him because he's an alcoholic. But so I would love for him to get treatment, but I know at the same time that he's not going to be able to until he's ready. So I just tell him, I love you. Well, see, if you need me to go with you sometime, I will. Just let me know. Yeah. But just know that, if whenever you're ready, I'm here.
Yeah. Well, I think that's important. And it probably sets him at peace a little bit because it goes back to what we were talking about. You can't help people that, I didn't say he doesn't want help, but he's not he
ready.
Wants help. He's not exactly.
Right.
They're not ready for help.
As long as you give them that option, don't try to make it seem like it's forced. Because a lot of the time when somebody feels like it's forced, even if it has nothing to do with alcohol or drugs, what happens when somebody tries to force you to do something? What do you normally do?
So
you push back.
there's I think it's individual based as far as intervention.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like I'm saying with the pamphlets, that's just one of many things in the toolbox that you can use.
So, so from intervention, a couple of the things that I think we can do better as a state or as a society here is intervention, prevention, and treatment.
Yep.
So
Yeah, absolutely.
So from intervention, I would say to the people out there,
I would myself. I'd love to see more stuff in schools about what addiction causes. Not so much in the because when I was going through school, they had those things, but it always
They had DARE.
It always felt like it was somebody shaking their finger at you, I guess.
yeah.
And I don't think that
think
necessarily works.
I mean, I'm an older guy. I think times have changed from when we were in high school of what what is the information that's out there, and I think what the kids deal with in high school now is much different. And like you're saying,
Well, it's constantly evolving because one thing that I can take advantage of is when I was going through my addiction, when I went home, that was that. I was at home.
Yeah.
Nowadays, when kids get addicted, when they go home, it follows them.
yeah.
Right. Everyone's got their cell phones, so
So we intervene. To me, is the first step.
Yes,
Intervention.
absolutely.
We have to acknowledge that somebody needs help or we
Coming
need
with
help.
it with passion. Passion and consideration of knowing that the other person's hurting.
and get rid of the stigma
Yeah.
because
it's so easy to become addicted that anybody off the street could be
Yeah.
addicted, and you might not even know.
Yeah.
So there shouldn't be a stigma, because if there's a stigma against one type of person, there should be one about everybody.
And then the stigma not only goes against them, it goes against the family member. I remember some people that I worked with when I was in the military. Their mom worked with me, and a couple of her children had drug issues.
Yep.
So
And
then
there was a
she's
stigma
embarrassed,
against her,
right?
Yep.
because
That's why I'm
Because she
pretty
raised kids that had
yeah,
drug issues.
shame on you, type
Right.
of thing.
Yeah, that's why
And it
I'm
could've
pretty
started out
open
as-
about mine. Is I feel like I don't mind being that whipping pole for people to whip if it's going to help them change.
Yeah.
So
And that's good. Telling the stories is good, and being open about getting people into the next step,
yeah,
which is prevention.
yep.
And the waters could be muddied a little bit between intervention and prevention.
Prevention this is where we're going to come into politics a little bit, and it's going to have to do with the border. I hate to say it. You want drugs to stop in this country, you need to address the problem.
Yeah, and that's one thing that, again, I try not to bring the politics into this, but that's why I am doing this podcast, so that we can
Yep.
get the issues out there. I believe that our law enforcement is doing the best they can with what they have. I believe that
Yes,
we can
I agree
better
with you.
man
I
them.
agree with you on that.
I believe we could better train them, and I think we could better equip them.
Absolutely.
Because our border, the interdiction part of it is huge.
Yes.
So as soon as you said that, Sean, I knew almost exactly where you're going, and I agree. And I would caveat that with our law enforcement and our agencies that are out there.
They got to quit being restricted to go after the big stuff. And that's what I mean by we need to have these discussions of what a user is and what a dealer is. Because once we have that figured out, we can address the issue.
Right.
So I look at it a little differently. I'm a libertarian, so I don't really look at it from the enforcement aspect of it. I look at it also from, I think if we do something like decriminalize or legalize, marijuana or cannabis, then people will be less reliant on the other stuff. So then they could just go and buy whatever they might need for like pain medicine,
Right.
which you could also use for marijuana, but you could also obviously use that for like Percocets and oxycodone and stuff like that. So instead of, because even the prescribed legal stuff it's the same thing as the illegal stuff, only by the pharmacy.
Well, it's driven by the black market. I mean,
Right.
if you can cut the money out of the black market, you
There's-
cut the crime out of it.
There are a lot of arguments out there from both sides about, or all three sides, I would say.
Before I forget this, I think we can all agree on this. the war on drugs didn't work.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, I'm
That's
100%.
exactly where I was going.
Okay, I just
The
wanted
war
to
on
get that out
drugs-
there before I forgot.
The
So.
war on drugs did not work. If anything, it hurt the bigger cities. It hurt people that the black and minority communities more than it did before. The war on drugs definitely didn't work. It gave
Look what it did. Well, look what it's done. It's pushed it into the suburb communities of pushing it out of. So it's had this horrible progression from the start, and it's just becoming a bigger monster.
Well, let's.
and it's given a lot of power to the federal government and the state
too.
governments, and almost no return on investment in the positive.
I don't think it's being looked at. There needs to be a fine balance. I think it's just there's an issue. Let's throw money at it.
Right. Let's try to
Well,
eradicate it, and
and
it's nothing that can be eradicated.
And it goes right back to what I was about to bring up is the prevention aspect. How do we help, keyword help, prevent alcoholism or drug abuse? Because like you said, if it helps prevent one death, it's worth it.
Yeah. Prevention.
Were there prevention programs that were out there that said, okay, hey, this.
If I would have known what narcotics were, I guess a little better. I probably wouldn't have done them. But
Yeah, but
like,
at the age of 13, though.
yeah,
would-
it's a harder one for me to
Right.
answer.
so I don't think
I'm
it's
trying to look at it more as a parent.
I don't think it's as much prevention as it is treatment at this point, because we already have DARE inside the classrooms. I don't think that really worked all that well. I think it's safe to say that
There's data out there on whether it worked or didn't work,
well, it's all dependent on the communities as well. I'm sure like the communities in like the Bronx and New York would, you'd see a
Myself-
lot different for
See,
it working than if it was in Waterville, Maine.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's at that point in time, it's less of a prevention and more of a stop trying to criminalize the aspect of the user and take a lot of that money and put it into treatment. And help that person instead of criminalizing and throwing that person in prison.
And I think another thing, instead of the DARE programs, like, don't get me wrong, I like the idea of the education, but we were talking about it just a little bit ago, and I said DARE felt like somebody was pointing their finger in your face. Instead of it being like a sit down, let's teach you that this is bad, let's go do team building. Let's do more. I'm sure it's probably, I haven't really done DARE. You got to remember DARE was back for me probably 20 plus years ago now.
Yeah.
So I think if we can make, because myself, if my hands are busy, I'm not getting in trouble.
Yeah. Well, and I also think, like, if anyone remembers, like, the old DARE commercials with, like, the old egg that was sizzling in the pan, that's not
It's your
not
brain.
the
It's your
right.
brain
That's
drugs.
not the best way to try to prevent
Explain
people
it.
from using drugs. That's gonna, if anything, that's just gonna. So that's gonna do two things: either scare them so that they're never gonna want to do it, which that's probably unlikely, or that they're gonna just disregard DARE entirely because that idea that they would push that as a message, as opposed to like
They're gonna
a
equate it to
realistic
the whole
one of
thing.
love and treatment, then they'll just disregard the whole program and it will just not work.
Because this is another thing that if you're not somebody that knows a lot about addiction, say you don't live around somebody that has been through addiction, look into a thing called Rat Park. It's a study that was done, and
What's it called?
it's called Rat Park.
How do you spell it?
It's just rat, like a rat, R-A-T, park, P-A-R-K, Rat Park. And this study essentially is they were giving morphine to rats, and what they were doing is they were putting it in water, and they were keeping them in just like a cage by themselves, and then they got them addicted, and then they put like water and then morphine, water laced, and the rat, when it was in the cage by itself and had nothing to do and just food, all it would do is it would eat, and after a while it stopped eating, and then it just strictly went to the morphine. Well, then they took the rat and put it into a population, and had the rat wheels, the ball, the things it could play with, and other cool rats.
Like a community.
Yeah. So it shows how how the mental effect of addiction works, and it really shows.
Isolation.
Yeah, it's a good. It's if you want to understand addiction, look into that. That give you a better understanding, I think.
So you touched on it a little bit with cannabis. I don't know the answers, but there's a lot of stigma about cannabis out there that it's a gateway to harder drugs. What's your opinions on that?
If you want to talk about gateway drugs, to be honest with you, I think the number one gateway drug is alcohol.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Really?
Yep.
Yeah, because that's normalized
There is
in
no
society through everything.
that, and there is no other thing out there that messes my mind up that makes me stop thinking to the
Yeah,
point that alcohol does.
It's a huge judgment.
It's
issue.
it's the only thing that I'll throw everything that I know out the window and not care at all.
We're getting close on time here, and there's a lot of stuff I want to talk about. We talked a little bit about interdiction, intervention, prevention, and I want to touch on treatment real quick. Just really quick, because I am going to do another episode specifically on treatment and some of the issues within our state that we have on treatment. From your experiences, what works and what doesn't? I don't know how else to ask it. What
This
works and
is
what doesn't?
where I fight with a lot of people within my political party because I believe that we need more treatment. I'm a fan of all sorts of treatment.
Right, because not one person, it's not going to work for everybody. Not one type of treatment is going to universally work for everybody. So we have to be able to have.
I think we need
Different-
faith-based
like a
choices.
menu of treatment, so to speak.
Right.
Everybody's different. Has a different hunger for it, I
Yeah.
guess you could say.
We need more faith-based treatment. We need more medical-based treatment. We need more facility-based treatment. We need more counseling facilities
Right.
that can deal with this mental health aspect.
And I think that's like the worst part is that we have a big mental health issue in the state. And
Yeah.
I think getting the treatment part will also help some of the mental health part.
Well, see, this is the thing, too. A lot of people think that mental health is somebody that has gone crazy.
Right.
It's not necessarily somebody who's gone. When somebody says mental health, don't think of it like that. Think of mental health of just keeping your brain healthy.
I totally relate to the mental health aspect, and again, I don't want to sidestep this. That's something I'm going to talk about with the veterans when I talk to them.
And that's huge.
Yeah.
Is
Mental health for veterans.
PTSD? You know?
Well, see, I suffer from PTSD too, and I do believe that played a factor of why I used for as long as I did.
and that mental health, and I'll touch on it real quick with the veterans aspect, and the stigma of mental health or drug abuse or whatever the case may be. I have PTSD. People will say, "Oh, well, what did you do?" There's a stigma that goes along with that.
They think there's
But
this
with
Wiccan stick.
veterans or with abusers or alcoholics, the mental health aspect, I think, it's not a drug, but I think that's to me personally as a man, I think that's the biggest gateway to any addiction problems, because is what's going on in mental health. And we were brought up at least I was in our society that men don't cry, men
Right.
need to
Oh,
suck
yeah,
it up
they-
and do whatever.
just
the case
work
may
right
be.
through
Oh,
it.
absolutely.
Which
That plays a
which-
huge factor.
Goes right into this whole conversation that
What is a man?
that we're having exactly of the stigma. Like when we were talking, we opened up. I didn't know Jeremy had a alcohol problem. I didn't know he was a former or once alcoholic, always alcoholic.
Well, see, that's the thing is, if people can be open with each other about these things and not call people trash or put people down for their, because this is one thing. My past is what has made me. This is the way I look at it. My past is what's made me. So you putting me down for my past doesn't really bother me now.
or your family or
But,
anybody.
Yeah, it's what's built me to make me now.
Right, it's
And
what's
that's
led you to where you are.
That's taken me a long time to come to terms with. But I think if we can help people understand that, I think that would be beneficial.
Yeah.
As we wrap up here, I guess I have one last question for both of you guys. What would you tell your families about? What would you say to your families right now?
In what regards?
As far as, because you talked about, you both touch on your daughter. You do it for your daughter, for your family.
It's a couple things for me. One is doing well, being able to be there for my daughter. Another thing in it is coming to terms with what I did with, or two family members I love, and then being
open about it.
Yeah, and then being able to reminisce and build with one another to rebuild that relationship.
Gotcha.
That right now, that's probably been the hardest part of my recovery, is making that amends with the loved ones I hurt.
Sorry for the poorly phrased question.
Oh, no worries.
This is
I knew what you were getting at. I just wanted to clean it up.
I don't
a
have
bit.
a list, and I didn't have a whole script of what I wanted to do.
Well, that's what makes these things real, man.
Yeah.
I mean, if you really want to get to the core issues of what is going on, it has
can't
to be
scripted.
This is not something that can be scripted. I'm sorry. The second you start scripting recovery, it's not recovery. It's somebody telling you something at that point.
So for you, Jeremy, it happened before your daughter was born.
Well, so it happened before she was born, but it also happened because when I stopped drinking, she was 4. Okay. So she like, for instance, it was always normalized when I was drinking in my house. Like, I'm thirsty. Can you give me a beer? So, but she was 4, so she never really knew me as a drinker. So I'm thankful that I stopped drinking before she was really old enough to form any kind of opinion.
How old is she now?
She's 12.
Okay.
She's in the 6th grade, and so now she doesn't remember any of me from when I drank, which is what I'm super glad of. So if I never had.
I'm glad you said that, because it's a little similar to mine, because when I went into recovery was when Kylie was born, but it didn't finally stick. That's why I had lapsed a few times. When she was 3 is when it finally, 2.5, 3 is when it finally stuck. That's why I said those 2 years.
And I never had any of the issues with like the family that, where I stole anything or anything like that. Because it was alcohol, so I was always able to just go to the store and feed my own, my own habit. I guess for my family, it would be just, I'm glad that you didn't really. There was a couple friends that saw me, but by and large, other people didn't really see me how I was back then, and I'm glad that was the case. I'm just sorry for anyone that knew me at the time, like my daughter's mom at the time, and my cousin who used to like basically live with me. I'm sorry for anything that I did that was stupid.
Well, see,
it takes a man to say that and to acknowledge that.
Here's another crazy part too: is there's been times where I was so messed up that I did something to somebody out in the community. Like years later, I bump into this person when we were using, and they're clean now, but they'll be like, "Do you remember what you did?" I had no idea what I did. So apologizing to somebody for something that you did and not remembering it is another hard thing to come to terms with. But I know that I was there because I can remember the situation of the time that I was there. I just can't remember the exact moment that he's talking about.
I bring that up because, it's important, I think, for us as people to be able to, like Jeremy just said, and what you just said, it takes a lot to apologize and to admit the error in our ways. And I think there's a lot to be gained by that, especially when you have young children. It sounds like your daughters are pretty close to the same age.
Yeah.
as the years go and the challenges that our young children are facing, not only here in Central Maine, but in our country as a whole, is challenging. And we need to do what we can to
We need to do better.
yes, we definitely need to do better. And again, I appreciate the time sitting down with you guys. It was a good talk. We could talk forever. I have a
That's the thing about recovery is it never ends. So there is plenty to talk about.
I have my brain is always going. I have questions I wanted to ask. I've been writing some stuff down, but it's like, gosh, we could just talk forever.
And
But
if you guys have any questions out on from Kevin's cast here, you can always reach out to us on all sides of Kennebec and ask me and Jeremy
I was
any questions
going to get to
about
that
recovery.
that cheap plug there.
Hey, that's what I'm known for. I got to get those plugs in.
And it's enjoyable to me during this process to meet people like you guys, because during this process I met both of you before I came on All Sides Kennebec podcast and was discussing some of this stuff. So I would say, if anything, to talk politics real quick, come June 14th, win or lose the primary, I've made some pretty good friends through this process, and I've learned a lot about the issues that each of us face in our lives, whether it be, a plethora of different problems that our communities are facing. So if I'll wrap it up with saying that if there's anybody out there that has loved ones, or you yourself are having issues with drugs or alcohol, reach out to a loved one. In short of giving you phone numbers to call, I think, would you guys agree that reaching out to a loved one would typically would be one of the better things to do, to at least start?
Yeah, to start the conversation.
Yeah, to start opening up, and then go from there. And of course, there's all kinds of treatment, different programs. I know Waterville has the Hope program.
Yeah, Operation Hope. I haven't been part of it, but I've heard it's great.
Yeah. So there's things out there, and just we need to get better at understanding the problems.
Absolutely.
that are out there.
This is a good website you should plug for people if you want
Go
to
ahead
send
and
them.
plug it.
Okay, this is I'm not even sure how you pronounce it. How do you pronounce that?
How's it a good website if you can't pronounce it?
Kind of.
I just know the abbreviation. It's SAMHSA, but it's SAMHA. I can't even see. It's SAMHSA.gov, and it has a lot of places to be able to find connections to drug treatment.
Yeah, that's basically that's the.
Oh, there you go. Nice. I can read that.
Okay. Aha. But yeah, they have a lot of connections there.
So I think that's it. Unless you guys have anything else, we'll continue probably talking off the air.
I appreciate you having us on.
Yeah.
It's good to be on the other side of the table.
Yeah, it's a little different.
And for everybody out there, these guys are also co-hosts of All Sides Kennebec. They do a show every Tuesday night. They've been working hard at getting guests lined up. So check out their podcast as well. And as always, it's great talking to people. If you have anything for me, or you have questions for me, go ahead and log on to my website, www.kevinkitchen.com. And there's information on there. You can reach out to me. What? I'm clicking my pen. He's busting me for clicking my pen.
That's why I have something that doesn't make any noise that I play with.
I usually have to get on him for
Could
it.
you hear the noise?
A little bit.
Yeah, that's fine.
So, and again, from a shared studio here in Waterville, thanks for watching, and look forward to speaking to you guys again in the future. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.